Welcome, dear listeners, to a journey to the heart of 19th century Brazil. Today I share with you a story that transcends time, the narrative of Esperança, a woman who discovered that true love is born not from burning passion, but from the courage to choose to stay when everyone else fled. A story of second chances, of families built not only by blood, but by daily dedication, by silent care, and by the strength of those who believe that every wounded heart can be healed. Leave it in the comments. It's always a pleasure to know where our listeners come from. If this introduction has already touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like. It helps us so much to continue bringing these stories that warm the soul. Year 1885, coffee plantation in the interior of São Paulo, Brazil. The September rain fell gently over the coffee fields of Hacienda Santa Clara, as if the sky also wept for the sorrows that land harbored. In times when everything seems disposable, this story reminds us that the deepest bonds are woven slowly, with patience, like a quilt embroidered stitch by stitch. I would like to know, from what city or region are you joining us today? Inside the colonial mansion, between adobe walls that kept echoes of lost laughter, Don Evaristo Mendoza rested his forehead in his calloused hands and allowed himself a moment of weakness that no one could witness. 20 months had passed since Maria del Carmen departed, taking with her not only her sweet presence, but also the order that kept that house standing. Now the 7 children ran like wild colts through the corridors, while he, a man of 44 years accustomed to taming the land and horses, felt completely lost before that domestic chaos. In the next room, 5-year-old Sebastian cried because of a nightmare, while Luz, barely 3, searched for the rag doll she had lost among the rumpled blankets. Rosa, at 11 years old, tried to assume the role of the mother who had gone, but her little hands were still too small to carry so much weight. Joaquin, the eldest at 15, watched everything with eyes that already carried an adult's sadness. Evaristo rose from the chair where he had been sitting, his steps echoing on the cold tiles. The last governess had left the week before, just like all the others. None could endure more than 2 months in that house that seemed to have lost its soul. In the kitchen, among the coffee aroma that still lingered from dinner, something caught his attention. A feminine voice hummed softly a lullaby, and through the crack of the door he glimpsed a figure he didn't immediately recognize as part of the chaos. Esperança, the cook who had been working there for several months, gently rocked Luz against her chest, while Sebastian fell asleep leaning against her skirt. For an instant, Don Evaristo felt something he hadn't experienced for a long time, the sensation that perhaps there still existed hope for that shattered family. But would that silent woman be capable of bearing the weight of so much responsibility? Esperança Morales possessed hands that knew how to fix what was broken, not only ceramic bowls or undone seams, but also hearts that bled in silence. At 24 years old, she carried in her dark eyes a serenity that contrasted with the youth of her face, as if she had lived more than the years allowed to tell. Orphaned since she was 12, when cholera took her parents in a single terrible week, she had learned early that life offered no guarantees, only opportunities to begin again. Raised among distant relatives who saw her as a burden, then sheltered in the convent where the nuns taught her domestic skills, she intimately knew the loneliness that inhabited abandoned hearts. For 8 long years, she had moved between other people's houses, always in the condition of employee, always observing from afar the happiness of the families she served. In the last house where she had worked, something terrible had almost happened. The violent hands of the master's son still haunted her nightmares, and the desperate flight in the cold dawn still made her heart race when she remembered. Now, at Hacienda Santa Clara, she had found something different. It wasn't just work that tied her there, but a strange sensation, almost maternal, that awakened when she saw those 7 children navigating aimlessly through their own home, especially when she observed Don Evaristo, a man strong and decisive in all aspects of life, except when it came to those little beings who were his blood and his responsibility. Esperança knew how to recognize a family that needed to be sewn together again, stitch by stitch, with patience and love. And perhaps, just perhaps, she was the right needle for that delicate work. That night, while organizing the last dishes in the silent kitchen, a decision began to germinate in her heart, like a seed planted in fertile earth. But would she have enough courage to propose something that could change not only her life, but the destiny of an entire family? Saturday in September dawned clear and full of promises, when Remedios Vasquez descended from the carriage in front of the mansion of Hacienda Santa Clara. Daughter of Don Patricio, a prosperous grain merchant, she brought with her not only the possibility of a new marriage for Don Evaristo, but also the hope that those children would finally find a new mother. Remedios was a young woman of 23, with wavy hair that shone in the sun and well-cut dresses that spoke of her good education. She knew how to embroider, read and write, and had been raised to be the perfect wife for a man of position. Don Evaristo received her in the main parlor, nervous like a boy on his first encounter, while the children spied curiously from the top of the stairs. Esperanza observed everything from the kitchen, preparing the snack that would be served in the visiting room. There was something in her chest that tightened when she saw Don Evaristo's hopeful smile, but she pushed the feeling away, concentrating on arranging the finest porcelain cups in the house, those that had belonged to the late Maria del Carmen. It was then that destiny showed its cruel face. Sebastian, trying to spy better on the visit, slipped on the stair banister, and in his fall knocked over the entire tray of porcelain that Rosa was trying to carry to impress the potential stepmother. The noise of the pieces scattering across the floor echoed through the house like an omen. Esteban, 13 years old, tried to help with the cleaning and cut his hand deeply with one of the fragments. His cry of pain triggered a chain reaction. Amparo began to cry uncontrollably. Luz ran after the doll that had fallen. Tomas tried to hide a vase that had also cracked in the tumult, and Joaquin shouted at everyone to be quiet. The chaos extended beyond the house when the horses, frightened by the screams, broke part of the fence and began to gallop through the patio. Don Evaristo ran between trying to contain his children, care for Esteban's wound and contain the animals, while Remedios watched that scene with wide eyes of panic. In less than an hour, the young woman was back in the carriage, promising to think about the proposal, a gentle lie that everyone understood as a definitive goodbye. Meanwhile, Esperanza was making a decision that would forever change the course of that story of mismatches. Night had fallen heavy over Hacienda Santa Clara, bringing with it a silence charged with despair. Don Evaristo had sat on the porch, his head in his hands, allowing tears to finally escape. It was the first time he had cried since Maria del Carmen's wake, and the tears came laden with 20 months of accumulated exhaustion. "We're too impossible," he murmured to himself. "What decent woman would accept entering this chaos?" From inside the house came the sounds of night. Sebastian still crying in his room, Rosa trying to console the younger ones, Joaquin scolding Tomas for something he had broken during dinner. It was a symphony of desperation that echoed through the adobe walls. It was then that Esperanza appeared at the porch door, bringing with her a steaming cup of coffee and a presence that radiated serenity. She approached slowly, like one approaching a wounded animal, and placed the cup beside him before sitting on the stone steps. For several minutes they remained silent, listening to the cricket song and the whisper of wind in the coffee fields. Then, with a soft but firm voice, Esperanza broke the silence. "These children deserve a mother, Don Evaristo." He raised his eyes, surprised that someone would address him in that moment of vulnerability. "I understand the pain of orphanhood," she continued, her words laden with sad wisdom. "I know what it is to grow up not knowing where our place is in the world. And I also know what it takes to heal those small hearts that bleed in silence." Esperanza breathed deeply, gathering courage for the words that would change both their lives. "I stay. I marry you." The proposal fell between them like a stone thrown into a calm lake, creating waves that spread through the silence of the night. Don Evaristo looked at that woman who had just offered him not only her hand, but her entire life. But would that be the solution his broken family so desperately needed? The following Sunday dawned bathed in golden sun that seemed to bless the decision made the night before. Don Evaristo had spent the entire dawn walking through the coffee fields, weighing Esperanza's words and the weight of responsibility he carried on his shoulders. At daybreak, his decision was made. It would not be a marriage of overwhelming passion, but an agreement between two souls who understood the value of a second chance. She had offered her life to heal a shattered family. He offered his name and protection to a woman who intimately knew the value of honest work and genuine care. Father Anselmo was called still in the Sunday morning, and the ceremony took place in the small oratory of the hacienda, decorated only with white roses from the garden that Maria del Carmen had so loved. Esperanza wore a dark green dress with white lace details, the most beautiful she possessed, while Don Evaristo wore his best navy blue suit. The 7 children attended the ceremony with a mixture of curiosity and hope. Rosa held Amparo's hand, who couldn't stop smiling, while Sebastián and Luz clung to Esperanza's skirts as if she were a lifeline. Joaquin observed everything seriously. Esteban nervously played with the bandage covering his cut, and Tomás whispered questions no one answered. The ceremony lasted only 20 minutes, but it was enough for Esperanza Morales to become Esperanza Mendoza, and for 8 people to find a new beginning. That night, out of mutual respect and understanding of feelings still forming, each retired to their own room. But for the first time in 20 months, Hacienda Santa Clara fell asleep in peace, as if the walls themselves sighed with relief. However, transforming a practical agreement into a true family would require much more than a ceremony and good intentions. Esperanza's first months as Don Evaristo's wife were like the delicate work of one who mends an old quilt. Each stitch given with care, each patch placed in the right place until the damaged fabric began to show its original beauty again. She didn't arrive imposing rules like a general conquering territory, but gradually introduced subtle changes, like one who plants seeds and patiently waits for harvest time. The first transformation was in the morning routine. Every morning at 6:30, she gathered the family for a brief prayer before coffee, not by religious imposition, but because she knew that rituals give security to children who lived in chaos. Little by little, meals stopped being pitched battles to become moments of conversation. Esperanza listened to each child with genuine attention. Esteban's stories about the horses he trained, Rosa's concerns about studies, Sebastián's nighttime fears, Luz's daily discoveries with her inseparable doll. The conquest of each one was different and gradual. Rosa became her immediate ally, recognizing in Esperanza the maternal strength she so needed. Amparo called her Mama Esperanza for the first time on a rainy afternoon, when the new stepmother consoled her after a nightmare. Sebastián and Luz accepted her with the naturalness of small children, who instinctively recognize who truly cares for them. Esteban was won over when he realized she didn't try to prevent his mischief with the colts, but taught him safer ways to deal with the animals. Tomás resisted longer, constantly testing the limits of Esperanza's patience, until he discovered she was fair in her punishments and generous in her forgiveness. Joaquin, the eldest, critically observed every movement of his stepmother for months, until the day he found her crying alone in the kitchen on the anniversary of Maria del Carmen's death. At that moment, he understood that Esperanza wasn't trying to replace his mother, but to honor her memory by caring for those she had left behind. And while the house was transforming, something unexpected began to bloom between the two adults who had united out of necessity. January arrived at Hacienda Santa Clara, bringing with it the humid heat that made the coffee fields exhale a sweet and earthy perfume. 4 months had passed since the marriage of convenience, and something subtle but profound was changing between Don Evaristo and Esperanza. It began with the evening walks they took together through the property, discussing plans for the children's education and necessary improvements to the house. Evaristo had discovered that his wife possessed natural intelligence and keen perception about people. She knew exactly when Rosa needed extra affection, when Joaquin carried some worry, or when Tomás was preparing some mischief. Esperanza, for her part, admired Evaristo's dedication to work and family. She saw how he strove to be not only a father, but also an example for his sons, how he genuinely worried about each child's future, how he respected Maria del Carmen's memory without allowing himself to be a prisoner of the past. The conversations became longer, more intimate. They spoke about interrupted dreams, about fears they carried, about the simple beauty of seeing a family beginning to heal. Evaristo told about the plans he had to expand the coffee plantation, and Esperanza shared her vision of how to transform the house into a true home for the children. It was on one of those walks at sunset, when the sky painted itself orange and pink over the green fields, that Evaristo stopped and looked fixedly at the woman walking beside him. The wind played with Esperanza's dark hair, and her eyes reflected the golden light of day's end. "You brought light where there was only survival," he told her, his voice laden with an emotion that surprised him. Esperanza felt her heart accelerate, but her response came as natural as the breeze that enveloped them. "And I found home, where I only expected work." It was the first declaration of true love between them, a love that had been born not from sudden passion, but from respectful coexistence, mutual admiration, and the daily construction of something greater than themselves. But the past has cruel ways of reappearing just when we least expect it. The April afternoon was hot and muggy. When Aurelio Herrera appeared at Hacienda Santa Clara unannounced, riding a black horse that seemed as arrogant as its rider. Esperanza was in the backyard hanging washed clothes when she heard the sound of hooves in the main patio, and something in her chest contracted with a terrible premonition. Aurelio was a 28-year-old man with a well-trimmed mustache and clothes that denounced his privileged social position. Son of a prosperous landowner from the neighboring region, he had been Esperanza's employer 2 years before, at the time when she desperately tried to flee situations that left her vulnerable and frightened. Don Evaristo received him with the courtesy due to a neighbor, offering him coffee and a place in the shade on the porch. But Aurelio's eyes searched for something, or someone, specific, and when they finally saw Esperanza crossing the patio with a basket of clothes, an unpleasant smile spread across his face. "So it's true what they're saying," he said, his voice laden with insinuations. "Little Esperanza managed to get ahead, from employee to lady of a hacienda. What an impressive rise." Esperanza felt her blood freeze in her veins, but kept her head high and continued walking toward the house. Aurelio, however, didn't intend to leave things like that. "Don Evaristo," he continued, feigning casualness, "I hope your wife has told you about our previous acquaintance. It would be a shame if there were misunderstandings about her past." The tone of barely disguised threat didn't go unnoticed. Evaristo felt something dark and protective awaken in his chest, but maintained his composure. "My wife is an honorable woman," he replied coldly, "and I don't usually discuss her personal life with strangers." Aurelio laughed softly, a sound that made Esperanza, even inside the house, shiver with fear and bad memories. Of course, but perhaps we should talk alone about this. There are certain pending matters that need to be clarified." The storm that Esperanza so feared was finally approaching, and she knew she could no longer flee from her past. Esperanza knew she couldn't avoid that confrontation forever. When she saw Aurelio in the patio, whispering poisons in her husband's ear, part of her wanted to simply flee again, take some clothes and disappear before the truth came to light and destroyed the happiness she had built so carefully. But there were 8 people in that house who depended on her now, 7 children who had finally found stability, and a man who had offered her not only his name, but his heart. She couldn't simply abandon them to protect herself. When night fell and the children retired to their rooms, Esperanza sought Evaristo in the study. He was sitting in front of the desk, with a glass of brandy in his hands and a pensive expression on his face. "He wants to talk to me tomorrow," said Evaristo without lifting his eyes. "He says there are pending matters about your past." Esperanza sat in the chair in front of him, her hands intertwined in her lap to disguise the trembling. "Then it's better that I tell you the truth before he does." And there, in that study lit only by the trembling light of a candle, Esperanza told everything. She spoke about the 2 years she had worked on the Herrera hacienda, about how Aurelio had begun to pursue her with inappropriate looks and comments, about the terrible night when he had tried to force her and she had to flee at dawn, leaving behind her few belongings and her reputation. "He says I seduced him," she finished, her tears finally escaping, "that I promised things I didn't fulfill, that I owe him satisfactions." Evaristo remained silent for a long moment, processing each word. Then he stood up, went around the table, and knelt in front of his wife, taking her trembling hands in his. "I trust you," he said, his voice firm and clear. "And tomorrow when he comes, it will be the last time that man disturbs our peace." Evaristo's protection brought relief, but Aurelio still had cards to play in that dangerous game. The following morning, Aurelio Herrera returned to Hacienda Santa Clara with the confidence of a man who believes he has an advantage over his adversaries. He hadn't come just to meet with Don Evaristo, but to take Esperanza back, not as a wife, but as something much worse. He found Evaristo waiting for him on the porch, but not alone. Joaquin was also there, now 18 years old, with broad shoulders inherited from his father, as well as 2 of the most trusted workers from the hacienda. The reception was no longer cordial. "I came to get what is mine," declared Aurelio without beating around the bush. "That woman owes me certain compensations, and I intend to collect them." "Señora Mendoza is my wife," responded Evaristo, his voice low but laden with an authority that made horses calm down and men respect his decisions. "And she is under my protection." "Your wife?" Aurelio laughed with contempt. "Do you know what kind of woman she is? Do you know the promises she made to me? The favors she owes me?" It was then that Evaristo stood up slowly, and Aurelio realized he had underestimated the man in front of him. Evaristo Mendoza was over 6 feet tall, had hands accustomed to heavy work, and eyes that had already faced devastating losses without bending. "My wife told me about your attempt to violate her," said Evaristo, each word cutting like a blade. "And about how she had to flee from your house at dawn to preserve her honor." Aurelio paled. He didn't expect Esperanza to have the courage to tell the truth. "Now, you have 2 minutes to leave my property," continued Evaristo, approaching. "And if I ever learn that you approached my family again, it won't be a civilized conversation we'll have." Joaquin stepped forward, supporting his father. The workers did the same. Aurelio looked around and realized his position of strength had transformed into vulnerability. He mounted his black horse and departed, but not before casting one last look of hatred toward the house, where Esperanza watched everything from an upstairs window. The threat had passed, but its consequences would still reverberate in the hearts of those who learned the true meaning of protection and loyalty. After Aurelio left, taking his threats and resentment with him, a strange calm settled over Hacienda Santa Clara. It was as if a storm had passed, leaving the air cleaner but still charged with electricity. Esperanza spent the following days quieter than usual, processing not only the fear she had felt, but also the revelation that she was no longer alone in the world. For the first time in her life, someone had fought for her, protected her honor, believed her word against the lies of a powerful man. The children perceived the change in the atmosphere, but differently. Instead of tension, there was something new in the air, a sensation of deeper security, as if the family had been tested and emerged stronger. Joaquin walked with his shoulders straighter, proud to have supported his father in the crucial moment. Rosa hugged Esperanza more frequently, as if she wanted to protect her too. It was Amparo, now 10 years old, who best expressed the feeling that floated over everyone. One afternoon, while helping Esperanza prepare dinner, she said simply, "Mama Esperanza, now I know that no bad man can take you away." The simplicity of the girl's observation hit Esperanza like a revelation. She had spent so many years fleeing, hiding, accepting bad jobs because she thought she didn't deserve better. But there, in that kitchen full of familiar aromas, surrounded by the noise of children playing, she finally understood what it meant to have a true home. That night, she sought Evaristo in the study again, but this time she didn't bring fear or painful confessions. She brought only gratitude and a love that had grown as naturally as the plants in the garden. "Thank you," she said simply, "for believing in me when I didn't even believe I deserved to be defended." Evaristo drew her into his arms, and there, in that embrace that spoke of protection and partnership, both knew they had found something rare and precious, a love built on trust, respect, and the courage to protect what matters. But the greatest gift destiny had reserved for them was still to come. 3 springs had succeeded each other at Hacienda Santa Clara when Esperanza discovered she carried new life in her womb. The news came one September morning, announced not by dramatic symptoms, but by the silent certainty that only women know when life begins within them. The entire house was transformed with expectation. The children, who were now truly her heart's children, vibrated with the possibility of a little brother or sister. Rosa, now 14 years old, naturally assumed the role of Esperanza's special assistant. Joaquin, now a young man of 21, and Evaristo's right hand in the hacienda's business, treated his stepmother with a new delicacy, as if she were made of crystal. Evaristo lived divided between deep joy and constant worry. He had lost Maria del Carmen in her 8th childbirth, and although he tried not to let fear take over, his nightly prayers became longer and more fervent. Esperanza, for her part, lived the pregnancy with a serenity that surprised everyone. There was something in her way of caressing the growing belly, in her increasingly frequent smiles, that transmitted deep peace. It was as if she had finally found not only a home, but her true purpose in life. Winter passed slowly, with Esperanza knitting little blankets and embroidering diapers on cold afternoons, always surrounded by the children who wanted to help with the preparations. Tomas, now 12 years old, had appointed himself official protector of the pregnant mama, carrying anything she needed to move. Sebastian and Luz, now bigger, competed over who would be the best older sibling for the baby who would come. In the spring of 1888, when the coffee fields bloomed again, filling the air with sweet perfume, Maria del Carmen was born, a tribute to the first wife who had been accepted with affection by Esperanza, and who now received the honor of lending her name to the daughter who would definitively complete that family. Little Maria del Carmen arrived, bringing with her not only joy but confirmation that some loves are blessed with eternity. Little Maria del Carmen was now 6 months old, and her presence had brought to Hacienda Santa Clara a harmony that seemed impossible just 4 years before. She was a calm baby with big, curious eyes, who smiled at everyone but reserved her most radiant smiles for Esperanza and Evaristo. On a golden March afternoon, while the entire family gathered on the porch for the daily coffee ritual, an unexpected visit arrived. It was Father Anselmo, who had celebrated Esperanza and Evaristo's wedding, accompanied by an elegant lady no one immediately recognized. The visitor revealed herself as Doña Carmen Vázquez, sister of Don Patricio, father of the young Remedios, who had fled years before from the chaos of the house. She had come not to judge, but to meet the family about which she had heard so much talk in the city. "Everyone comments on the transformation of this house," she said, observing the well-dressed and educated children, the order that reigned in the environment, the peace that emanated from every corner. "They say it's a miracle what has happened here." Joaquin, now a responsible and articulate young man, conversed about the hacienda's business with propriety. Rosa embroidered delicately while caring for little Maria del Carmen. Esteban demonstrated his skill with horses. Tomás recited the lessons he had learned. Amparo played a soft melody on the piano Evaristo had bought for her. Sebastián helped serve the sweets that Luz had helped Esperanza prepare. "It's not a miracle," said Esperanza softly, rocking her daughter in her lap. "It's just what happens when broken people have the opportunity to heal together." Doña Carmen looked around once more, at Evaristo, who smiled with genuine pride in his family, at the children who demonstrated not only good education, but real happiness, at Esperanza, who radiated a serene dignity that had definitively transformed that house. "My niece Remedios married last year," she commented, almost as if speaking to herself, "to a rich merchant from the capital. She has a big house, many servants, expensive dresses." She paused, observing the spontaneous smile Esperanza directed at Sebastián when he offered her flowers from the garden. "But I don't know if she has what you have here." At that moment, everyone understood they had received not only the visit of a respectable lady, but recognition that their family, built on courageous decisions and true love, had become something worthy of being admired and envied. 5 years had passed since that September Sunday when Esperanza Morales had become Esperanza Mendoza. Hacienda Santa Clara prospered not only in its coffee plantations, but mainly in the harmony of its inhabitants. Joaquin, now 23 years old, had married a young woman from the neighboring city and built his own house on the property's limits, but had lunch every Sunday at the big house, bringing his wife and the first grandson to Esperanza and Evaristo. Rosa, at 19, was preparing for marriage to the judge's son from the county, a serious and hard-working young man who courted her with respect and dedication. Esteban had become the best horse trainer in the region. Tomás showed talent for numbers and helped Evaristo with the hacienda's accounts. Amparo had grown into a delicate young woman who played piano and taught first letters to her younger siblings. Sebastián and Luz, now teenagers, studied at the city school but returned every afternoon home, where they felt truly loved and welcomed. And little Maria del Carmen, at 5 years old, ran through the same corridors where chaos once reigned, but now filling the house with crystalline laughter and the contagious energy of a child who grew surrounded by affection and security. On a December afternoon, while the entire family prepared for the year-end festivities, Esperanza found herself alone for a few minutes on the porch where everything had begun. No longer the silent and fearful woman who had offered her life for a marriage of convenience, but a respected lady, mother of 8 children, beloved wife of a man who protected and valued her. Evaristo found her there, contemplating the sunset over the coffee fields that were now also hers. "What are you thinking about, my dear?" "I think," she replied, smiling with the serenity of one who found her place in the world, "that sometimes God gives us exactly what we need at the moment we believe we have lost all hope." He embraced her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder, and together they watched their children playing in the garden, children of blood and children of the heart, all equally loved, all equally theirs. Hacienda Santa Clara had become more than a prosperous property. It was the living symbol that true love is born not only from passion, but from the daily choice to remain, to care, to build something beautiful, even when everything seems lost. And there, on that porch where 2 wounded souls had met and chosen courage instead of fear, Esperanza and Evaristo understood they had created not only a family, but a legacy of love that would last for generations. True love is not the one that arrives like a storm, but the one that remains like fertile earth, where all other happiness can grow.